one of the things that I'm Xenia Bhembe. I'm a pediatric psychiatrist, but I am more passionately a Black wellness advocate. And I'm excited to be invited to come back and speak to this community again this year. And want to have, and decided I would do a little bit different than I have in the past, which is I want to offer you something a little bit more engaging. So what you are being handed is a values assessment. And what I want you to do is I want you to, this part of the page, there's several pages, some you will take with you, but this part, which has the lines to fill in, what I want you to do as we get started is to fill in what you consider as your values. What are the things that are your North Star? What's the things that define how you move, when you decide to move, and what things you move on? Yes? I'm just trying to listen to okay. This is like popping my ear thing, not a... Okay, certainly. So all of you, yes, okay. So I'll give you about 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds to complete the worksheet. And while you're doing that, I'll talk a little bit about what our outline is going to be for today. There's a lot to cover, and I hope that it's going to be rich and valuable, interactive discussion or time together. And I frame it in this way around this idea of value and what matters to you. And because I think, as it sounds like it's been discussed lots of the morning, at least for the last session that I sat in on, that we can get lost in the mix of everything that's around us. And so potentially honing in, narrowing in on what is important and how to define what is important is a place I think makes the most sense to start. Okay. So we're going to start with suffering, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and how that's relevant to the Black community. What is the idea of things that we don't know, we don't often get told in the Black community that are essential pieces of how you might orient yourself in the world. We're going to talk about how health effects interrupt your value, your dream, your outlook, your North Star. And then we're going to talk about what reframing the narrative around all of this does and means for us. And at the end, we'll do a little bit of a values workshop. That's why you're doing some of this work right now, but we'll come back to that at the end. And then we will, at the end, talk a little bit about things that we can do to make sure that our passions don't turn to poison, okay? So this, if you have a smartphone, which I know most of you do, I'm going to have you scan the QR code and pop in what you think are your, what you defined as your North Star. Okay, good. Can everyone get it? Is it working? What is your North Star? Now, that values list that you just started, what did you define? And how do you know what it is? Right? And was it always that? Is it up for debate, the thing that's your guide? Has it changed over time? Can you be persuaded out of it? All right. Oh, great. Compassion, peace of mind, stability, loyalty, honesty. Just pop it up. There we go. Helping others, well-being, empathy, fairness, security, living with kindness. So at the end of the day, most of what we value are lovely things. They're just lovely. And hopefully this will play. There we go. Oops, sorry. Ready? Not doing such a good job of playing. Okay, well, we'll keep moving because we've got lots to get through. But this is a scene from Life is Beautiful. And if you don't know that movie or if you don't remember it, this scene is, this gentleman is in love with this woman that is in the concentration camps with him. And he's found his heart's desire in trying to entice her. And so he's trying to work his magic on her. And I bring it in because our lovelies, our values, are sort of magical, especially as Black individuals. Because as Black individuals, you have to sort of accept life as it is and traverse life as it is. Now, there are often ways in which we push up against it, we resist up against it, but we do have to push through life as it is. And if there is no better example of having done that, it's the descendants of the enslaved. It's those of us in the Black community who have lived a legacy of racial socialization that is informed, that is imposed, that is prodded against us and attempted to potentially minimize, reduce us to just that. And there are plenty of examples, though, right, in our life where there are those who have pushed against the unacceptable, unimaginable. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, obviously, you know, he was one of our presidents, and he, on a family vacation when he was 39, fell off the boat. We don't know whether it was the fall or what was in the water that caused him to 3 days later be paralyzed from his waist down. And the rest of but he hadn't begun to actually even make the mark that he was going to make. 7 years after he had this unfated moment in his life, he became governor. And years after that, he became president. So he had a North Star that was so embedded that beyond what happened to him in circumstances in life, he was able to move on. And there goes, look, little heart, little animation, don't want to show. Yeah, it doesn't want to show. Okay, there it is. There are those of us who also live today with chronic pain or chronic illness or disabilities or challenges in our lives that we live beyond and we live past, just like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and just like those descendants of the enslaved. So the lovelies are nice, right? We need them. We need them to sort of keep us focused. We need them to keep us anchored. We need them to keep us encouraged. We need them to keep us clear. But oftentimes, it's very hard to see clearly through every circumstance and every situation, what is our lovely? What is our value? What is it that is our North Star? So now, so when you identified your value, for those of you in the room who have been in marginalized communities, how much did that impact what your value was? My Black sisters and brothers in the room, how much did that impact what your value was? Truth be told, I think living Black is underrated because it is a whole package of magic and somethingness. No matter how you look at it, we are people who have been thriving and surviving and accepting and enduring for many years. And to be honest, most enslaved Blacks didn't escape or engage in rebellion. Like you would think somehow that this experience of Blackness that has been the history in this country would have swelled a whole host of kind of resistance. Most of them stepped into a life of accepting what was the reality, living in that reality, and finding a way to center value despite what was around them. A really important thing to note. And even with the political and civil rights era, we know that that has not even surfaced the biggest parts of what it has been to be a value living Black in America or any colonized state. It's a wonder that Black travail has surfaced at all, but it surely has been tough when it's been up against the white saviorism that sort of is out there lurking to see pity of Blackness as it's been crafted only as its aim. The fact that to exist black takes something more than just Ivy League education or enviable pedigree is a lost idea of exceptionalism. And when you find your value, when you understand what value is, you understand that that exceptionalism is a suffering that has its own reward. It's a hardship that in some ways makes you good at life, even though it is a hardship. Now, don't get me wrong. There are things about Black history endowed with the perseverance and survival that is hard to bear. Witnessing, experiencing, recounting endless assaults on a Black existence is suffering. And suffering is hard. And suffering has devastating effects. And more than not, it has devastating effects to our media because they are on the front lines, telling the stories, viewing the stories, embracing the impact so that they can communicate to us, those of us who are not in media, what is happening and how it's happening. But it has devastating effects. And if we were not careful, we would think that all of the devastating effects has to do with us being Black. It just has to do with being Black. Truth be told, though, it has nothing to do with being Black. It has to do with being racialized in a society that defines what Blackness means. And if you can separate yourself, if you can shift the perspective around what the definition of Blackness really, what this definition of Blackness really means, then you also have a way of anchoring yourself to your North Star, to your value, no matter what is going on around you. I love this quote by Malcolm X. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. And it's a nice entry into this, and I hope it plays, but I don't know if it will, this beautiful example of how the impact of a society that has demonized, has interpreted, has minimized, has imposed messaging on individuals has left the Black community. This study was done by two psychologists in the 1950s, Mamie and Kenneth Clark. They were a married couple. And during their study, what they did is they looked to see what was the impact on children when they were seeing themselves as being poor or unvalued in the society. And that led to the Brown versus Board of Education decision around segregation. We all know that. That's a central piece. But what we didn't understand then, and I hope gets to be clear today, is that there was a narrative that we had adopted about it was Blackness that's the problem, that was even permeating then. And so this was duplicated multiple times. This clip, if it plays, was duplicated in Italy. And I'll play it for you. Play? Please? If you think if I ask it nicely, it'll play? Okay. And I warn you, this can be very emotional and disturbing.
Quale bambola è bianca? Quale bambola è nera? Quale delle due è bella?
Questa.
Qual è quella bella? Qual è quella brutta? E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva? Qual è buona?
Lei.
Perché è buona?
Perché ha gli occhi celesti.
quale è cattiva? Perché è cattiva?
Perché è tutto nero.
E qual è la bambola che ti somiglia di più?
Get back to absentee. So that's hard for me. I don't know for any of you how hard that is to watch. And I think what I take from this clip is that, one, this message about blackness is not about blackness. At the end of the day, the one variable that remains constant is whiteness. You see Latino kids, Italian kids, Asian kids, all identifying as black. The one constant is whiteness. And so the narrative has to shift, because it's not then about how are we going to maintain our wellness in the world of assaults. While I do agree, we have to. In the world of assaults that come at blackness, we really have to put whiteness in a different place. We have to standardize how we see ourselves in relationship to this differently. That's when wellness comes. Wellness will only come when we can come to the place where we define our value. The consequences of this assault on the person, on your image, on your identity related to race, has incredible complications or consequences to health. It causes stress reactions that are allostatic overload. And if you don't know what allostatic is the way the body tries to work itself back to stability, back to balance. Stress puts you out of balance. Excessive stress keeps you out of balance. And being kept out of balance makes you work distracted around your work, distracted around your love, distracted around your joys, distracted likely around the thing that is most important to you, your North Star, the way you sort of define what drives you every day and how you move forward every day. So not only then does allostatic load happen around toxic stress or continued stress, there's also the idea that there's generational, genetic movement of stress. We pass it down to our kids. And without even knowing it, within our DNA shifts slightly when you're overloaded with stress or work stress or racial stress. And then our kids' DNA start to look a little different than they did before, probably because they had to adapt to the overload of cortisol and stress hormones raging through your body to accommodate living in a world that was constantly feeling like it was assaulting you. I'm going to move us forward. So it's in our best interest to think about how we reframe the story. And you guys know that. I'm not telling you anything. I do want you to think about how you might have been connected to the story of blackness, how you might have been connected to the story of race. It isn't necessarily about focusing in on all the anti-blackness. How about the white supremacist movements and structures and standards that we hold ourselves to that make us sick? So I'm not even gonna try to do this because it's a little bit too much. But the question was going to be, so how do you understand your blackness? And one of the things I think I wanted to generate in our time together and have you thinking about is, how has black been the most challenging for you? What's the thing about being black that has made it unsafe, burdensome, overwhelming, stressful, untenable for you to do? A lot of those things have made you unable potentially to navigate safely. The world around us has made it impossible for you to navigate safely. And one of the things that we know, and Harvard tells us this, that even in the workplace is 3 times more benefit to their employees and profits if psychological safety is prioritized. But how do you prioritize psychological safety? DEI messages. How many of you think that that worked? No? Yeah, some. No, yeah, some. DEI workshops, task force, psychological safety. I think moments like these obviously make it possible to feel like there's a psychological safety prioritized in our workspaces. But it's hard to know that psychological safety is enough if your psychological inner self is off center. And here's what happens. I just wanted to show you this. So on your left is a map of the police violence by state. On your right is a map of obesity by Black dominant in the state. And what you will see is that there's a correlation between police violence, the states that the most police violence, the darker colors on the left, and the darker colors of obesity on the right. Now, I sort of shudder to even use this example of obesity because I think that itself has a white standard that we probably need to sort of resolve. However, thinking about obesity as a measure of health, this race-imposed, socialized system, these ideals of standardization around whiteness, kills us. The chronicity of how we live our lives is a heavy burden for around this idea of Blackness. There's longer periods of illness related to cardiovascular disease, mental health issues, trauma and substance abuse, all come as a result of continued assaults in the socialized system. So it's not just being Black. We've, in medicine, recently started to move against changing the norms around things like kidney function. Because all years past, we defined that race, Blackness, had something to do with your kidney function. And so we raised the lowered functional level for Blacks, and we left the lowered functional level for whites. What ended up happening is whites were more able to get kidney transplants when it was time due for them to get it, and Blacks were not because they wouldn't register as having dysfunction enough. The numbers were already high. They didn't get higher. So there are ways in which we have impacted our lives around everything. So I have 5 minutes. All right, so let me talk to you about what our workshop is today. So there are 3 different areas that we're going to talk about how to get the psychological flexibility. And 3 of them, one of them is about how to understand emotion, which is on your far left, experiential avoidance and diffusion. In the middle is in the present and self as concept, which is how to be in the moment and the here and now. And to your right is value and committed behavior, which is what you've been working on, what you've spelled out in your value propositions or your committed actions around your values. As Black individuals, it might look a little something like this. It is what it is. I do life the way I do life, and I'm gonna be at peace doing life that way. Or I'll let it go. Whatever's coming to me, if it bothers me, I'm going to let it go. And surely there's much more to uncover and unpack in all of this, but I want to make sure that we engage in this last exercise before our time together ends. In the middle is the sort of mindfulness motion of being in the here and now, not getting distracted by things that you regrets from the past or worries from the future, being able to center ourselves and be in the here and now. And I'm no more than what I've been through is I might not be a good writer, or I may be disorganized, or I might not necessarily have the best speaking voice or the speaking etiquette or cadence. Oh my gosh, that makes me a wholly bad person, right? That makes me wholly ineffective. That makes me wholly unproductive. If you only see yourself in one category, you will reduce your value to that one thing. And the brain works by constantly repeating the things that are most defective about us. We talk to ourselves about it. Finally, living life like it's golden is being able to say, okay, these are my values. You've spelled them out today. You've written them out. And then the next step that we have to do in the next 2 minutes is just do it. So now, your homework, your assignment now, flip your pages over. And what you're going to do in the paper that you have and have been writing on is what is the top, maybe pick 1 or 2 top things that you've written as your values. What will you do? What's an action plan you will execute to demonstrate that that is a committed value to you? Put action to your value. What is that thing that for you will show others that this is a valuable thing to you? For me, it might be, I want to learn how to be a great speaker. What does that mean? I better show up and do some speeches. Even if I'm good at them, even if I'm still learning, I want to show up and do some good speeches. Or you may say, I want to be able to tell a story in a way that convinces the audience that hadn't yet seen or thought about this in a way that moves them. Then that means you find a way to continue to commit yourself to an action related to that. So write down what your values and what your committed action will be towards that value. I'll give you about a minute because we only have 30 seconds. And while you're doing that, what I'll say is what you will find the moment you commit an action to an ideal is that the noise stops. The distractions reduce. You become clearer, centered, and more focused on what is truth and what is abstract and noise and busyness. And whiteness can be one of those busyness things. Now, granted, whiteness has given us lots of great things. Capitalism, for instance. Not. But there are ways in which you can even begin to take on the things that potentially have such controversy for you and find the goodness in them, as long as you know where your North Star is. Your exercise to continue today, to start today and to continue, is to continue committing to writing out action plans toward the things you value. Put some meat behind it. All right, so before I go, let me talk to you a little bit about some of the perils for our media colleagues. So this idea of censorship is a potential trap, particularly around media, because what it says is there's one standard and there's one voice and there's one story. That's censorship. If you are not able to come into the newsroom or the media room and speak and challenge and present, you are not being allowed to be an authentic self. And outside of your authentic self, that's unsafe psychologically. And so you are being promoted, you're being invited to exist in an unsafe psychological environment. And there are consequences for that, such that if you don't speak out, find someone who can, so that that becomes a safe and healthy environment again. The other thing I will say before I go is that there are ways in which this tips the scale. So that toxic stress, that struggle that we as Blacks and in this racialized society know exists, we live in it, but then there are times when it gets too much. So there are ways in which there's some things that you can know that are risk factors for when it gets to be too much. One, if you tend to have an avoidant coping style, which means that you tend to always walk away from stuff that are difficult. If it appears as if you avert any challenging situation. Or if you have a past history of trauma, specific trauma. The media and our media colleagues are already at risk because you have high intensity and frequency of exposure to toxic and challenging and intense material. In addition to this, one of the things that has been found in stress and health in the last years is that conflicts with editors and inconsistent leadership also is a risk factor for traumatic experiences in the workplace for media workers. So this is a mnemonic. that I invite you and I share with you, I can share these slides, to think about what would it look like if you were tipping the scale. So it's Nair, and if any of you are as old as I am, Nair used to be a hair removal product. I don't know if it still is out on the market. Okay. So Nair is N for negative changes, meaning negative mood, not wanting to do anything, not wanting to sleep, not having concentration, absence. A is avoidance, avoid talking about things, avoid going to places, avoid triggering memories. I is for intrusive thoughts, constant ruminating, preoccupating, replaying of ideas that have been traumatic, disturbing, or distressing, even in your sleep at night. And reactive, where you're easily agitated, easily annoyed, always on the lookout, on the front. Okay. So as I close, what I'd like to say is there's a way in which I've given this talk 3-4 times now, and I shifted it this year. And the reason I shifted it is because I really find there is a way in which the literature is now showing that authenticity, in the scope of authenticity, really is a measure of value. And the more you can align in value and you can practice and adhere to practices that help with alignment and value, your authenticity will follow. You will find the faces will find you, where you will speak, be heard, will you be seen, you'll be safe, and you'll be well. Here's some resources, and I thank you again for the invitation to come, and I hope this is an audio, so let's see if this will play. Where's my cursor? And I'm done. There's a little heart. I'm trying to, guys, really? Yeah. There. Okay, let's see. There it is. Okay. And you know my grandma, you understand why I feel. I was born for this mission. I got your permission to be who I was born to be. That's me. To walk through the fire. My mama raised me. I wish you could hear it. And you knew my grandma's, you'd understand why I'm free. I was born for this mission. I could not need your permission to be who I was born to be. That's me. Born to walk through the fire. My mama raised me. And if you knew my grandma's, you'd understand why I see. I was born for this mission. I could not need your permission to be who I was born to be. That's me, born to walk through the fire. That's me, mama raised me. That's me, understand who I be. I was born for this mission. I could not need no permission to be who I was born. That's me. Thank you. NDRE.